very pleased to have you here today, Maria. So she's a professor at, I mean, everybody knows all of this. I feel a little weird introducing you, but yes, professor at Princeton, the 2012 MacArthur Fellow, renowned for the proof of the strong perfect graph with Robinson, Seymour, and Thomas, and lots of work with perfect graphs and clock-free graphs. And we're really excited today to hear about the recent progress on the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture. So thank you very much.
All right, should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for introducing me. And I'm really happy that we can continue doing these things. As Joe said, this series, nothing happened to it at all. It was already in existence, and now we have many more of this. And I'm really happy to be a part of this and to keep the world going and keep our intellectual activities going. I really think it's very important. So also thank you very much for coming. I know it's hard and everybody's in different time zone and everybody's dealing with different things, but thank you for being here. And I'm going to talk about the last 10-15 years of work I've been doing. I will not cover everything I've done for the last 15 years, but I'll mention some things. And this is about the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture, which is a problem, as I said, I've been interested in a long time, for a long time. So that's okay. So my work is in induced subgraphs. I try to understand what happens to a graph if you exclude a certain configuration or a certain substructure that's called an induced subgraph. I'll make it precise in a couple of slides. And the sort of most general question there is, what can you say about a graph about which you know that a certain induced subgraph is missing? And you can try all kinds of things. For example, we all know this fantastic theorem about what happens if you forbid a minor. It's a theorem of Robertson and Seymour. For any graph, if you forbid it as a minor, then for every h, graphs that don't have h as a minor have a very restricted structure. You can describe them, you can understand them. So the world is wonderful. It seems that nothing like that is true if you forbid a general induced subgraph. We tried pretty hard. At the moment, there's not even a conjecture. So maybe for now, trying to mimic the minor structure theorem is hopeless. Maybe for now, maybe forever. So then there's another thing you can try. Maybe something interesting happens to the chromatic number of a graph, right? So again, I'm in a situation where I fix some graph H and I look at all graphs G that don't have H as an induced subgraph, and I ask, can you say something nice about the chromatic number of G? So what kind of nice things can I hope for? Well, maybe the chromatic number is bounded as a function of the clique number. And the answer is no, that's not true either. While with structure, we don't even know where to start. With sky-boundedness, actually, we have counterexamples. It is not true that, however, you forbid an induced subgraph, the chromatic number is bounded as a function of the clique number. So you can try all kinds of other things, and nothing works, except there's a conjecture of Erdös-Hajnal that it's a specific statement. You can try to prove or disprove it, and at the moment, it's conjectured for excluding any graph as an induced subgraph. So what does the conjecture say? Informally, it says that for every graph H, if I exclude it as an induced subgraph, then in the host graph, there is either a huge clique or a huge stable set, right? So what does it mean huge? Well, much bigger than what happens if you didn't exclude it. Now, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, a clique is a set of pairwise adjacent vertices, a stable set is a set of vertices pairwise non-adjacent, and then the conjecture is for every H, there is an epsilon that depends on H, so that if I look at an n-vertex graph that does not contain H as an induced subgraph, then in this n-vertex graph, there's a clique or a stable set, which is this big, n to the epsilon. Now, in what sense is it huge? Why did I need to bother excluding H in order to get this number? Well, in a random graph where you have all induced subgraphs, the expected clique and stable set sizes log the number of vertices. So there are graphs where the expected clique and stable set size is log the number of vertices, and the conjecture is as soon as something is excluded, this size jumps to n to some power. So now it's finally time for me to tell you what an induced subgraph is. Okay, so here's a slide. H is an induced subgraph of G. Okay, let me back up for a bit. So you know what a subgraph is, right? You start with a big graph, you delete some vertices, delete some edges, what you got is a subgraph. An induced subgraph is more restricted than that, So you're allowed to delete vertices, and then if you deleted the vertex, you have to delete all edges that contain that vertex, right? Because you ruined them. But what you're not allowed to do is just delete an edge. The only way to get rid of an edge is by deleting one of its ends. So here it's written formally. H is an induced subgraph of G. The vertex set of H is contained in the vertex set of G. And then if you have two vertices in H, then they remain adjacent if they were adjacent in G. Right? Two vertices in H are adjacent if and only if they were adjacent in G. So here's some examples. This is graph G. This is an induced subgraph of G, because to get this from G, what you do is delete this middle vertex, and then you know the edges that are incident with it disappear, and everything else is still there. This is not an induced subgraph of G, because to get this from G, right, so you would need to just delete this edge and delete that edge without deleting their ends, and that's not allowed. So this is an induced subgraph, this is not an induced. And I'll say G is H-free if G doesn't have an induced subgraph isomorphic to H, or sometimes I just say G does not contain H. So all containments in this talk, unless I explicitly tell you otherwise, are induced subgraph containments. Okay. So, right, so now let me just put up the conjecture again for every H. If I look at an n-vertex graph, which is H-free, doesn't have H as an induced subgraph, then this n-vertex graph contains either a clique or a stable set, which is this huge. And one way to think about this conjecture is that it tells you that excluding an induced subgraph has a global effect on a graph, right? It seems that if you exclude an induced subgraph, it's something very local you're doing, right? If I exclude an induced subgraph on 10 vertices, it's just some information about 10 tuples of vertices. So then the question is, does it do something global to the graph? And the conjecture is, yes, it does. It makes the size of a clique or a stable set jump up significantly from log the number of vertices to the number of vertices to a power. So in the same paper where Erdös and Hajnal made the conjecture, they also proved the theorem, which is a weakened version of the conjecture, but in some sense, it already tells you that excluding an induced subgraph has a global effect on the graph. So what they proved is this statement: for every H there is C, so that if an n-vertex graph is H-free, so far the assumptions are the same as in their main conjecture, then H has a clique or a stable set of this size. So I'm just going to close one of the shades just a minute. My computer is getting scarily hot, and this is really a bad time for my computer today. Okay. So they so they proved that there's a clique or a stable set of this size. So all we are fighting for is to get rid of this square root, right? We're hoping it's e to some power times log n, but instead they had e to some power times square root log n. So the difference between this and that is that the square root is present in the theorem but not present in the conjecture. Okay. So this is the theorem. There are some other things that are known, some other weakening of the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture that are known, but let me not tell you about all of them. But what I will tell you about is which H the conjecture is known for, right? Because so the conjecture is almost 40 years old, more than 30 years old. So people have tried to solve it, and it's known for some graphs H. So it's known for graphs H on at most 4 vertices. It's known for this graph, which is called the bull. And then there's a theorem of Alon-Pach and Choi-Moshe that allows you to start with 2 graphs for which you know the conjecture and make a bigger graph. Right? Start 2 small graphs H for which you know the conjecture and make a bigger graph for which you know the conjecture. And specifically what they proved is that if I know the conjecture for excluding H1 and excluding H2, then I also know it for the graphs that you get from H1 and H2 by substitution. So there's a picture here, but let me also show it to you on my board. So I start with a graph H1, and I choose my favorite vertex V, and I draw H1 from the point of view of V, meaning the neighbors and non-neighbors. And I also have a graph H2, and now I'm going to build a graph which is sub H1 V H2, meaning I've substituted H2 for V in H1. What you do is you delete V, you replace V with a copy of H2, and then you make H2 adjacent to all the neighbors of V and non-adjacent to all the non-neighbors. So everybody in H2 individually looks like V. And this is the graph obtained by substitution. And then the theorem of Alon-Pach and Choi-Moshe is that if you have some epsilon 1 that works for H1 and some epsilon 2 that works for H2, then there is an epsilon 3 that works for the sub H1 V H2. All right. So what Alon-Pach and Choi-Moshe did, they produced an infinite family of graphs, excluding which gives you a big clique or a big stable set. Maybe I'll move so you can also see the board. Joe, was that bad? Did nobody see my board? I should remember to unshare the screen. Let me quickly do
no, you should.
I can see your board fine.
I can see your board fine. So
okay.
Folks, if you are not able to see Maria's board, you might try to put yourself on speaker view, and you should be able to slide the proportion of your screen that shows the board and shows the slide in order to enlarge Maria.
That is very clever. I see. Okay, good. So then I don't need to do anything.
Hold on.
Individually.
Okay, so I'm hearing somebody say, yes, that works perfectly. Or you can double click on the thumbnail to toggle. Somebody else has put that. So if you look, folks, look in the chat, there's a whole bunch of tips that people have just put into the chat so that you can see Maria's board. But thanks for your patience. And actually, I have to say, this is a very nice setup for doing a talk, Maria. Yeah,
great.
thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I teach my class like this. So.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
We're learning all kinds of things from this talk.
So anyway, so Alon-Pach and Choi-Moshe, they provided this procedure to make infinitely many graphs H for which the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture is true. Also, if you think about this line for a second, proving the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture for small h's, the only one that's not obvious using their result is the 4-vertex path, and even then it's not hard. So this line, modulo the Alon-Pach Choi-Moshe result, becomes very easy. This line does not become easy. This is still pretty hard. But in any case, because of this result, all we need to do now is to prove the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture for graphs H, which are what we call prime. So prime means it's not obtained from smaller graphs by substitution, by this procedure. And then we don't know anything. So there are no prime graphs for which we know the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture and that have at least 6 vertices. For 5 vertices, we know this guy, and then we don't know anything else. So the other prime graphs on 5 vertices are the cycle length 5, the 5-vertex path, and there's also the complement of the 5-vertex path. But if you think about it for a minute, you'll notice that if you prove something for H, you also know it for H complement. So these 2 cases are open, and then all prime graphs on at least 6 vertices are open. So we really don't know very much. Okay, so moving on. So because we don't know very much, from now on, I'm going to try and ask other questions that are related to this conjecture. Let me remind you what the complement of a graph is. So what it means is you start with a graph and you change all the adjacencies. If a pair was adjacent, you make it non-adjacent. If a pair was non-adjacent, you make it adjacent. So for example, here, if I take this graph and I change all the adjacencies, you get that graph, as you can see, which is the same. If I take this graph and I change all the adjacencies, right? So then I go, the edges, I get a 1, 3, 3, 5, 5, 2, 2, 4, 4, 1. I get this graph. But of course, in general, taking complements does not give you the same graph. For example, if I start with this graph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so you can check that its complement is this graph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're not the same. Okay, so that's just a reminder of what the complement of a graph is. And then a variant of the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture that you can think about is, what if you forbid both H and the complement of H? And I apologize, this C should be inside the bracket. So it's H and the complement of H. So can you prove a variant of the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture where you've excluded two graphs, some fixed graph and its complement? So you might think it's easier because, right, for the bool we know it, and the bool is self-complementary. And then there's a lovely, lovely theorem called Jodl's theorem that I'll mention later, that it seems like it gets you a really long way toward the proof of this variant of the conjecture. So you start being very optimistic that this you can definitely prove. And then you notice that C5 is also self-complementary. So if these were so easy, then you could also prove the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture for excluding C5. And of course, everybody tried and nobody can do it. So this is not the easy low-hanging fruit you were hoping for, maybe. Also, it turns out that this is actually equivalent to the general conjecture. So really, this is not easier at all than what we started with. Okay, but now let's keep changing the conjecture further. So finally we can get something we can prove. So let me say a graph has the Erdös-Hajnal property if it has a clique or a stable set of size. So it's an Erdös-Hajnal property with respect to some fixed epsilon if G has a clique or a stable set of this size, the number of vertices of G to the epsilon. So then, to say the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture in this language, for every graph H, excluding H gives graphs with the Erdös-Hajnal property. For every graph H, there exists an epsilon, so that excluding H gives graphs with the Erdös-Hajnal property with respect to H. Okay, so now let's have another definition, strong Erdös-Hajnal property. So that's another thing that can happen in a graph. G has the strong Erdös-Hajnal property with respect to epsilon. If in G there are two linear size subsets, two subsets each of which has epsilon proportion of the vertices, and they're either complete to each other, meaning all edges between them are present, or they're anti-complete to each other, meaning there are no edges between them. And in a little while, I'll show you why this is called the strong Erdös-Hajnal property, and that's because if you have this property, you also have that property, but I'll show it to you in a little while. So then you can ask this question. For which H is there an epsilon, so that every H-free graph has a strong Erdös-Hajnal property with respect to epsilon, right? The conjecture is you always have the normal Erdös-Hajnal property, but what do you need to exclude to have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property? And then at least you can say something. You can say that in order for this to be true, H needs to be a forest and the complement of H needs to be a forest. And there are very few such graphs. Okay. So this is not so interesting. Graphs H with this property are very simple, and you can prove that in fact it's true for them, and then you can prove that for all other graphs it's not true. So okay, so this is not a good question. We made the problem too easy, right? We started the problem that was too hard, but now we made it too easy. So let's keep going. For which graphs H is there an epsilon, so that if you exclude H and the complement of H, then you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property. So that turns out to be a good question. right? If I didn't say strong here, then it's equivalent to Erdös-Hajnal, so still very hard. But if I do say strong here, then suddenly nice things happen. So it is true only if H is a forest that you can show. And then Liebenau and Philipp made a conjecture that it's if and only if. For every forest H, if you exclude H and its complement, then you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal problem. And this was a nice conjecture. It was open for a few years. Also, sort of, it was a satisfying conjecture because there's a dichotomy, right? It can only be true in this situation, and they conjectured it is true in this situation. And so, okay, this has previous results. So I'm going to tell you the punchline. In fact, their conjecture is true. Part of what I'll talk about is work with Alex Scott, Paul Simon, Sophie Sperkel, which is the proof of this conjecture. But let me first show you what's known. So the first theorem in this direction was a result of Busquela, Gut, and Thomas, and they proved it for the case when H is a path. So if you fix a T and you exclude a path of length T and an antipath of length T, complement of a path of length T, then you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property. And it's a beautiful, beautiful proof, very simple, but very beautiful. And it contains a lot of the ideas that eventually allow you to prove this conjecture. So I'm going to talk about this proof in some detail. Then a couple of years later, this group was able to strengthen the result of Busquela, Gut, and Thomas. They proved it for graphs H, which consists of a path plus one more pendant vertex distance 2 from the end of the path. And you think, right, I mean, there's not such a huge difference between a path and the path with one pendant edge, but there is. This proof is really hard. This proof is 2 pages, beautiful, no sort of real technicalities. This proof is really hard. So really it took a lot of work to get from here to there. So then this group was able to get further, and they proved the theorem for what's called subdivided caterpillars. So a caterpillar is a path with a bunch of leaves. This is a caterpillar. And then they were able to prove it for the caterpillars where you're allowed to subdivide edges. So these legs can now be long. Okay, so that was that. And then, as I mentioned a little bit later, with Alex Scott, Paul Simon, and Sophie Sperkel, we were able to prove the general conjecture. And in fact, we proved something a little bit more general. We proved that for every pair of forests T1 and T2, if there's an epsilon, so that if you forbid T1 and G and T2 in the complement, then you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property, which is this. And it's a technically very involved proof, so I'm not going to show you that proof. All I'll show you is, all I'll show you is basically this proof, and I'll tell you where they diverge a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit where they diverge. Okay. So, but first let me explain the connection between the strong Erdös-Hajnal property and the usual Erdös-Hajnal property. So the theorem is if you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property, then you have the regular Erdös-Hajnal property where you need to change the constant a little bit. Okay, so why is that? So first of all, the trick is I don't want to look for a big clique or a big stable set. I want to look for one object so that if I find a big one of those objects, then either there's a big clique or there's a big stable set. And this is an idea that already Erdős and Hajnal had. A good object to look for is something called a cograph. So what's a cograph? A cograph is a graph that you get from starting from single vertices, and then you're allowed to do disjoint unions and disjoint unions in the complement. Right, so let me draw an example here. right? So I start with some singletons, and then maybe I take a disjoint union, and then maybe here I built another one, and now I can take disjoint union and the complement. That just means putting all the edges between them. And maybe here I built another one, and now I can take another disjoint union. And now maybe I built another one, and now I can take disjoint union and the complement. So it's a graph that you get by iteratively doing this procedure. But they also have a nice characterization. So it's a theorem that G is a, maybe I can say H, let me say F. F is a cograph if and only if F does not contain this, a four-vertex path. So, okay, so that's very nice. So that means they're pretty simple graphs. Not only can I build them in a simple way, but they're actually pretty simple graphs. And an important theorem about cographs is that it's the bottom line of my slide. Where if H is a cograph, if F is a cograph, then the maximum between the clique number and between the stability number and the clique number of F is at least the square root of the number of roots. Right? So every cograph contains either a clique or a stable set of size square root its number of roots. And why is it good for us? Well, remember, we're looking for a big clique or a big stable set. So if I find a big cograph, if I find a cograph of size n to the epsilon, then I get a clique or a stable set of size n to the epsilon over 2, which makes me equally happy. Okay, so looking for cographs is just as good as looking for cliques or stable sets. And now I claim I can do induction using the strong Erdös-Hajnal property. So here it is, but I'll also do it on the board. So suppose I have a graph with the Erdös-Hajnal property, with a strong Erdös-Hajnal property, meaning I have two huge subsets, two linear size subsets, so that either all the edges between them are present or none of the edges between them are present. And now inductively, there's a cograph here. And maybe let me replace this epsilon by C just to improve my notation. So there's a cograph here of size this big, and the same there, right? That's inductively. And now I claim if I put them together, I'll get a cograph of the size I want, right? Because the main point is if I take a cograph here and I take a cograph there, the union is a cograph because either there are no edges here or all the edges here are present. And that's exactly how you build cographs. You take two smaller ones and you make them either complete to each other or anti-complete to each other. So when I take A union B, it's a cograph, and its size is 2c to the epsilon times this. And if epsilon is small enough relative to c, then this is at least, which is what you want. Okay, so if you could prove that that excluding a certain h gives you the strong Erdös-Hajnal property, then that would guarantee the weak Erdös-Hajnal property, the normal Erdös-Hajnal property. All right. Okay, so the next thing I want to do, so that was explaining why strong Erdös-Hajnal property is enough for proving Erdös-Hajnal. The next thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the proof of this theorem, but really what I'll do is mostly talk about the proof of this theorem. It's just they're similar. What I plan to say in this talk is similar. Okay. So there's a theorem of Rodel, which is very, very useful in this context. And what it tells you is that if you forbid any fixed induced subgraph, right, so for any fixed graph, if you look at graphs that don't contain it as induced subgraph, then in the big graph, there is a relatively big chunk that behaves very well. So what does it mean? So there is something again. So here's my huge graph, and it's H3. And then Erdös' theorem tells me that I can find a linear proportion of this graph, size at least Cn, C times the number of vertices, so that here either all vertices have very large degree or all vertices have very small degree. So mean degree at least epsilon Cn, or max degree at most epsilon Cn. Right, so it's a substantial portion of the big graph I started with, where either all the degrees are very small, that's small meaning sublinear, or sublinear, or all the degrees in the complement are very small. Okay, so that's what it says on this slide. If I, right, so and the way the dependencies work, I know my H and I know the epsilon, right? I know how small I want to make the degrees in the prime or in the complement. And then after I've decided on H and epsilon, the theorem gives me a C. So it gives me a proportion of the graph in which either this holds or that holds. And what do they do? Mean degree, this should have been 1 minus epsilon, sorry about that. So it tells me the proportion of the graph in which I can achieve either this or that. So the place where I don't have control is whether I'm getting small degree in G or small degree in the complement. That's the only place that the theorem doesn't let me control. Okay, so that's Erdös' theorem. And now let me show you why, if you believe Erdös' theorem. Okay, so one more thing. So I mentioned that Erdös' theorem seems like it would be very helpful if you exclude a graph and its complement, and now you understand why, because suddenly this or that disappears, right? You can assume you're in one case or the other because you've excluded the graph and its complement. So that's helpful. And now let me show you how to use this to prove the Buscella-Good-Thomas result. If you exclude a path and an antipath, then you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property. Okay, so maybe let me say something else before I do that. Remember I told you we now have a theorem that if you exclude any tree or any forest and its complement, you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property. They prove that if you exclude a path or its complement, you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property. The first step is the same. You apply Erdös' theorem, and then you assume that you are in this case where all degrees are small. And now you forgot where you started, and you forgot that you excluded something in its complement. Now you're proving a new theorem that says for every tree there is an epsilon, so that if you have an H3 graph and max degrees are small, then G contains two sets, which are two linear sets which are anticomplete to G. Right. So somehow a lot of sort of things where you had to say something or something in the complement are now gone because you're assumed that you're in this sparse case. Okay, so far it's the same whether you exclude a path or a tree, but now I'll just show you the path proof because the tree proof is too hard to show. So for every path, same setup, G is H3, max degree is small, then there are two linear size subsets and the complete division. And the proof is similar to, for people who know, similar to Jarfish's proof that excluding a path gives you a chi-bounded family. But if you don't know that, it doesn't matter because I'll say everything. So let me do the proof on the board again. So you start with a vertex, and you look at its neighbors, and its neighbors are tiny. Its neighbors are only size epsilon n. And you look at components of its non-neighbors. And then you notice that if all components are small, small meaning less than epsilon over 100n, then you can group them into two groups and get two sets that are anti-complete to each other. So what's the problem? Why can't you do that to these components? Is because one of them is huge. One of them contains almost everything. So the picture is not like this. The picture is actually like that. It's one huge component and many little ones, and almost everything is here. Okay, so now there's a vertex here that attached in that huge component. This set is only epsilon n. So do it again. This stuff breaks into components. Right? This is still good. This is still big. This is still only, you've only lost epsilon n vertices here and epsilon n vertices there. So if all of those are small, you can group them into two groups and get two linear size sets anti-complete to each other. So that's not what happens. What happens is there's a huge component and many little ones. Keep going. Somebody here has neighbors there. Do it again. And so you keep doing that. And then you notice that you're not going to be doing this for a very long time because what you're building is an induced path, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And everybody is only adjacent to the next vertex. So that means that eventually you will have many little components that you can group into two groups and get two linear size sets anti-complete to each other. And that's the proof, right? That's all. So as you can see, this is very far from giving you anything about trees, because for trees you need to branch, but it turns out you can do it in a much, much more complicated way. All right, so that was its proof. And this is that proof, but in a slide. And I just want to say one other thing along those lines. We can also prove we can also prove a similar theorem for when you exclude a graph and all its subdivisions. So, right, so we excluded a tree and the complement of a tree that was excluding one graph in the primal, one graph in the complement. Now I'm going to exclude infinitely many graphs in the primal and infinitely many graphs in the complement, meaning is that what I meant to say? No, just right, yeah. So I'm going to fix a graph H, and I'm going to exclude all its subdivisions as induced subgraphs in the primal and the same in the complement. So it says G prime here, but it should say G complement. Right? So G and G complement do not contain an induced subgraph, which is a subdivision of H. And then you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property. Either there are two linear sets complete to each other or two linear sets anti-complete to each other. Okay, so that was that. And now let me mention another variant, right? So far I talked about the strong Erdös-Hajnal property, and now I'm going to talk about the third thing, something called the weak Erdös-Hajnal property, right? We have strong Erdös-Hajnal implies normal Erdös-Hajnal, and now we have weak Erdös-Hajnal. So what's weak Erdös-Hajnal? So it starts out like strong Erdös-Hajnal. You have two sets in your graph, and you know something about their sizes. So one is linear in the size of the graph. The other one, it's a little bit tricky. So it's epsilon times c to the sigma times n. And epsilon is, we have these two parameters, epsilon and sigma, but c you can play with, and I'll explain in a minute what that means. So this is linear, this is questionable depending on what your c is. And then what's between them is that either it's very dense or very sparse. So either the density between them is 1 minus c, meaning that this proportion of all the edges is present, or the density between them is at most c, meaning at most this proportion of all the edges between them is present, right? And so the size of the second set depends on the density that you're trying to get. Somehow the dependency on the parameters here is complicated. Okay, but it's, you know, it's something you can say. It's two sets in the two relatively large subsets in the graph, and something unusual is going on between them. Either it's very dense or it's very sparse. All right, so now how is that related to where we started? It turns out that the weak Erdös-Hajnal property implies a weakening of the Erdös-Hajnal property, and it's the same idea as when we prove that strong Erdös-Hajnal property implies normal Erdös-Hajnal property. You look at these two sets, so they used to be complete or anti-complete, now they're very dense or very sparse between them, and then you find a cograph here and a cograph there, and then you say you can put them together and you don't lose too much because this is either almost anti-complete or almost complete. And if you do all these calculations very carefully and choose C appropriately, then you get that. So you get that if a graph has the weak Erdös-Hajnal property, then it has a clique or stable set of this size. So remember, we were looking, so Erdős and Hajnal could get always two. They could get this, that's their theorem. What we want is that. And this is in the middle, right? I would like for this log to be log, and then I would be very happy, but I can't, it's only log. Okay, so this is indeed weaker than the Erdős-Hajnal property, but stronger than what Erdős and Hajnal have already proved. And so Conlon, Fox, and Sudakov conjectured that whatever you exclude, you get the weak Erdős-Hajnal property, right? So this is, this would imply a weakening of the Erdős-Hajnal conjecture. And then with this group of people, so with Jacob Fox, Alex Scott, Paul Zimmer, and Sophie Sperkel, we proved that this is true for C5, and that means that if you look at an n-vertex graph and it doesn't have C5, then it has a clique or a stable set of this size. Now it seems, you know, like nothing if you haven't been thinking about it for 20 years, but if you have been, this is very exciting. I'm going to tell you that this is very exciting, at least to some people. Okay, so, and that's the best we know for C5 now. I don't know, I mean, maybe this is a truth for C5. Maybe just the reason it's so hard is because everything is false, and this is what's true. I mean, I certainly wouldn't bet any money on saying that if you exclude C5, you should have a clique or a stable set bigger than this. Okay, so now I have another 5 to 7 minutes, and I want to talk about something a little bit different. I want to talk about tournaments. So it turns out everything I just told you about graphs, which is sort of the classical realm in which to look at it, you can also do for tournaments, and it's a little more fun for tournaments. Things work a little better, at least sort of special cases work a little better. So what's a tournament? A tournament is a complete graph with directions on edges, right? So you start with a complete graph, you direct every edge in this direction or in that direction, and that's a tournament, right? So in a digraph, if you take a pair of vertices, then there's 3 options. Maybe U is adjacent to V, maybe V is adjacent to U, or maybe they're non-adjacent at all. In a graph, there are 2 options. Maybe they're adjacent, maybe they're non-adjacent. In a tournament, there's also 2 options. Maybe U is adjacent to U, maybe V is adjacent to U. Did I say the same thing once? Maybe twice. Maybe U is adjacent to V, maybe V is adjacent to U. Okay, so that's a tournament. And then a transitive tournament is a tournament with no directed cycles, which is the same as saying you can order the vertices so that all the edges go from left to right, which is the same as saying there is no directed triangle. It's all easy to see. And then, so in a graph for Erdős-Hajnal, we wanted to find a big clique or a big stable set, and then we convinced ourselves that it's enough to look for a big cograph. In a tournament, I'm going to ask, is there a big transitive subtournament? So let me say alpha of T is the maximum size of a transitive subtournament. And there's a conjecture by Alon-Pach and Troy-Moshe, and it turns out it's equivalent to the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture. And what this conjecture says is, so exactly the same as Erdös-Hajnal, but for tournaments instead of graphs, and for transitive subtournaments instead of cliques and stable sets, meaning for every tournament S, there's an epsilon, so that if you take a tournament T and it does not contain S as a subtournament, and you understand what that means, then in T, there is a transitive subtournament, which is this big, number of vertices of T to some power. And again, this is surprising, not surprising, but this is different than what would happen if you didn't exclude anything, because in a random tournament, the expected size of the transitive subtournament is just low. So far, this is all completely analogous, right? And so let me have the same terminology. T has the Erdös-Hajnal property if there is a transitive subtournament of this size, Erdös-Hajnal property with respect to epsilon. T has a strong Erdös-Hajnal property if T has two linear size subsets, so that everybody here is adjacent to everybody there. So now remember, this in graphs, strong Erdös-Hajnal property means two sets, so that either there are no edges or all the edges are present. So in a tournament, this is a graph. In a tournament, if you think about it, it should say either all edges go this way or all edges go that way. But it's the same, right? Just draw this picture differently, and it's the same. So somehow this and that in a graph becomes the same thing in tournament. Okay, so that's good. So this is a strong Erdös-Hajnal property, and you can prove, okay, not do that yet. And again, you can prove that the strong Erdös-Hajnal property implies the Erdös-Hajnal property, because why? Same deal. You find, right, so you're proving inductively, there is a transitive tournament here, there's a transitive tournament there, of size epsilon n, put them together. Obviously, this gives you a transitive tournament, I mean, of size Cn to the epsilon. You put them together, obviously this plus that together is a transitive tournament, and the size works out exactly. So this is all the same. And you can again prove the substitution property, just like you have for graphs. You can define substitutions for tournaments and everything works. But it turns out, right, so remember I told you for graphs, the biggest prime graph for which we know that if you exclude it, you get graphs with the Erdös-Hajnal property is the bull. For tournaments, there is an infinite family of such, an infinite family of prime tournaments, so that excluding them gives you tournaments with the Erdös-Hajnal property. So somehow it's a little bit nicer. It shouldn't be that much nicer because the two conjectures are equivalent. But somehow it's things. I don't know. You can prove nicer theorem for tournaments. You can prove nicer special cases for tournaments. And let me not tell you what galaxies are, because it's not so important. The important part is that it's just an infinite family of prime tournaments. And this is joint work with Eli Berger, Christoph Karmansky, and me from, as you see, 8 years ago. And in the same paper, it's also proved that if you exclude C5, which for tournaments is this graph, then you have the Erdös-Hajnal property. And for a long time, I wanted to know, do you have the strong Erdös-Hajnal property if you exclude C5? And it turns out that you do. So last summer, with Eli Berger, Christoph Karmansky, and Shiraz Arbib, we finally were able to prove that if you exclude C5 in tournaments, then you get the strong Erdös-Hajnal property. And let me stop here. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you very much.
We can unmute to applaud.
So there are questions. There are a lot of people. So you should be able to find a raise hand. We can try that down at the bottom. And Maria should be able to see if you've got your hand raised. You can push just on your space bar and toggle your mic on and off. So that way you can ask a question, but I'd ask that you keep your mics off unless you have a question to ask.
So where would I see this? Oh, I guess I'll wait until it's raised hand.
Yes.
You click on Manage Participants.
You could also, if you have questions, also you can put them into the chat. So both Bill and I are having a look at the chat window. So let's give this a minute. It often takes a little longer than usual to coordinate the questions. So yeah, so you can raise your hand. If you go down in participants, down at the bottom of your, most of you will be at the bottom of your screen. If you go to participants and click on that, you should be able to find the little thing to raise a hand, or like I said, you can just say in the chat window that you've got a question, and Bill or I will open that up. But thank you all very much for being here. This is a new paradigm, but I hope everybody is staying safe and staying well. And
All right, it looks like everything was
okay,
clear,
so
huh?
here we have, did you see the hand go up? So Mark Ellingham has a question. Go ahead and mute yourself and ask, Mark.
Okay, so the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture for tournaments, if you know that's true for a specific tournament, does that give you any information about the Erdös-Hajnal conjecture for graphs for a specific graph?
So no, in order to know it for a specific tournament, you need to know it for a lot of graphs, and the other way around. In order to know it for a specific graph, you need to know it for a lot of tournaments.
Do you need to know it for all graphs to get it for one tournament, or is there some family associated with that tournament?
So you don't need to know it for all graphs, but what you prove is that there is some random construction that a graph that comes out of that construction would imply that it's true for your fixed tournament. So I think the only way to really prove it is to prove it for all graphs. But I don't know, maybe there's something clever you can do. But there's some randomness there, so it's not clear what family of graphs you need to prove it for this particular tournament.
Our next question is from Albuquerque. Please unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi, Maria.
I can hear you.
My question was, do we know if Erdös-Hajnal holds for other containment relation than induced subgraph?
So there's a lot of work on trying to do it for ordered graphs. And the answer is I can't tell you where it stands because I'm not following it closely, but I don't know of any sort of natural containment where it's known, but I know people are thinking about other containments.
Thank you.
So I thought there was a second hand up, but I don't know whether it was just Mark staying up. Okay, Peter. Peter Winkler has a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Pete.
I have done so. Maria, thank you for a delightful talk. This maybe is a silly question, but I wonder whether there is a term for a complete or stable subgraph. If there were a short term for that, it might save people a lot of time.
Some people call them homogeneous sets, but unfortunately something else is called a homogeneous set. So this saves time, but does not improve.
I have a suggestion that you could. I have a suggestion that you could try. I call them dull graphs.
Dull graphs?
Which is either complete or empty is called a dull graph.
How about a desirable graph?
Yeah, that's too many syllables.
Okay,
Anyway, thanks again for a great talk.
thank you.
Okay, so there's been some background questions going on in the chat window, but it looks like they've been crowdsourced and answered successfully.
Amazing.
Yeah. So do folks have, are there any other questions? We generally leave the Zoom up for another half hour to let people just talk among themselves, chat, whatever. So this will be up for a little while. Maria had said that she'd hang out for a couple of minutes here. So informal time as well as
There's another hand, Joe.
question. Oh, there's another hand. Excellent. Go. Sorry, I lost the Bill. Do you have the name here? Well, anyhow, it's one hand. Whoever it is who just put a hand up, go ahead and unmute and ask your question, please. Nope.
They changed their mind.
Change their mind. Okay. Again, just encourage folks. I hope to see a lot of same faces at the meeting in Albany.
Samuel Braunfeld. Would you
Yes,
like to ask a question, Samuel?
No?
Samuel Braunfeld, please unmute yourself if you do have a question.
Yeah, you can just press on the space bar to unmute yourself, or you should be able to.
I have a question that
there
I
you
guess
go.
might be similar to Abulkar's question. So you can view forbidding a non-induced subgraph as forbidding a set of induced subgraphs. So is there anything known about Erdös-Hajnal when you forbid a non-induced subgraph?
So when you forbid a clique, it's known. That's Ramsey theorem. I'm not sure. I mean, you can think about it and you can get results possibly, but I don't have a good theorem to tell you.
Okay, thank you.
So sorry, actually, let me. So but wait, if you forbid a non-induced subgraph, it's like forbidding a clique, right? Yeah. So if you forbid a non-induced subgraph H on 100 vertices, then you don't have a clique of size 100, and then you know it's Ramsey theorem that you have a big stable set. So that's what I can tell you. So somehow this is not. This is known. You can maybe ask if you fix a graph and you forbid it and all its induced subgraphs or something, but I don't know. Anyway.
So we do have some folks who are heading out, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to just say thank you again, Maria. So if folks wanted to, I don't know how much feedback we'll get, but we could try unmuting a little bit to clap. But thank you very much. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.